Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 56th video of this series.
Greetings, everyone. Good evening.
Topic of this evening is very important. Actually, last week we made an introduction to it. Death. Yes, we will read passages on death, and together we will discuss death. In general, this is a scary topic for people. We don't want to think about it much. Yet this topic is explained in detail in this book, so as we read the related passage, we will go deeper into this topic. Dear Ümit, last year, in the videos we made together in the month of February, we had read and discussed the introductory passages on death. And now, this month of this year, we coincided again with this topic, this time with more details. Last week, there were many questions coming from our dear friends. If you agree, let's start with replying one of the most frequently asked questions. We read in the divine order in the universe that the spatium life is not a space for the beings. But it doesn't state that the spatium is not a space. Does the book mean that the spatium is not a separate place?
Well, first, we must remember how the being is built. The higher energies that exceeded the energy levels of the hydrogen cosmos were first as disarrayed fields, and in the midst of these exceedingly high energy fields, an original influence descends and gathers some of these high energies at a perceptual point. Therefore, what we call as the being is a conceptual point of gathered energy and influence, that is, matter that has high energy appearances. This is such a high-energy matter that it can materially express all needs and behaviors of the spirit which we cannot know about, and because it is of matter, and because the book states about spatium that, at that moment their space is only their beings. Then this is not a separate, ever-ready space, location, realm, or cosmos.
Yes. Let's start reading. After death, the being naturally becomes free. But if it cannot yet complete all preparatory application of the plan of duty in the world, it is not deemed as having completed the stage of humanity. Because of this, although it has left the body, that being is still at the stage of human. For no matter what, it has to return to the world in order to finish its unfinished business, and until he completes the preparatory applications there, its habitat will be the world, in the communal plan, mankind. So, the human being who has passed there, that is, who is isolated from all influences when it dies, has to spend some time in the spatium. There is a significant reason for this. A being, after rendering the application of its plan pertaining to the world life, needs to make an accounting of its assets, to completely absorb and appropriate them. For this, it needs to retreat for a while, to turn to its essence knowledge, that is, to do an accounting of them by comparing the knowledge it acquired in the last world life with its former knowledge. We previously said that mankind accumulates their assets in the world in their unconscious while they sleep, and, following death, the being's entering into a state of isolation by severing its connections to the surroundings, allows it to do the necessary applications for comfortably digesting all of this knowledge. Therefore, the spatium life is a profound and fundamental moment for contemplation and accounting for the being, and one of the reasons for inserting intervals called death into the human life that continues across a whole world cycle is to ensure this possibility. Here, the most perfect application of the knowledge of comparison is done. For, during that time the being is not disturbed by the realities coming from the surroundings, and the conscience mechanism which works freely finds the opportunity and possibility of making bitter and sweet comparisons of all the accumulated knowledge, and appropriating their conclusions to the essence being. So, in order to assist this application, all outside influences are ceased at the moments following death. There is no influence which can occupy and pull out its comprehension. The beings in duty prevent this. Nevertheless, it is still under the complete control of the plan of duty. If the coming of some influences to it from below is seen as necessary for its accounting and contemplation, this can be done only under the approval and control of the beings in duty. That is, the deceased X cannot get in touch whenever he wishes with his friend A who stayed in the world. This act is either permitted or not. in accordance with the very minute calculations pertaining to the contemplation and accounting of X during that time. When not permitted, then no power can allow its contacting mankind. A being who passed to the spatium cannot communicate with other beings like itself for an initial period of time as well. This is due to permission with the above-mentioned rules. For, there is no arbitrary thing over there. Everything is accrued under the very carefully planned control of the plan of duty, in the same way as the minutest needs and imperatives have been calculated when it was alive. The necessities of the deeds following death are done in the same way. When the being who passed to the spatium does not receive influences from the world and its surroundings, it is compulsorily left alone with the impressions of images existing in itself and starts to live within them. This state is like a very deep and powerful dream. However, this living is not for pleasure or suffering. Even if there are pleasures and sufferings during that time, the real purpose is the beings appropriating the acquisitions that have been gained in the world by the knowledge of comparison. And there, the completely free working of the developmental mechanism under the control of the plan of duty drags the being to the compulsory synthesis and analysis, which are done most often by suffering knowledge of comparison. In the meantime, because there are no mitigating influences of surroundings, painful emotions arising out of the comparison, and increase thousands of times more than in the world, put the being into tribulation, and knowledge can only become digested as essence knowledge after such an intense settling of accounts. Thus, all results are received. During this settling of accounts, since some very surprising situations for the being may occur, we call this the being's state of confusion. As we have said, this contemplation and accounting do not always, even most often, pass at ease and calm. Especially at the initial periods of the transition, it occurs generally together with states of uneasiness, intense suffering, torment, heavy confusion and bewilderment. Depending on the imperatives and necessities of the contemplation and accounting, more or less easy states may also occur. Sometimes, it may be turbulent to the extent of hellish torment.
Yes, this is a long passage, but it contains such important knowledge. In the divine order and the universe, the moment of death is defined as a value differentiation because the brain cells beings disengage their influences from the magnetic field of the body happens through value differentiation. Here I'd like to give some examples related to the feelings and emotions the beings feel or sense by their worldly consciousness and senses during and/or at the moment of death. I chose some examples and descriptions from an earlier book of Mr. Ruhselman, titled The Destinies and the Necessities. There, we read about the spatium that the being is completely left alone for a while, until the being understands that its body is now dead. That is, it is a necessity for the being to understand and acknowledge that it is now dead. When that book is compiled and getting ready to be published, due to a few incidents, publishing date is postponed, a month, 2 months. And elders of our society think that there must be a good reason for this delay. And then, another spirit session is done, and even in that session, there are some technical problems with the audio recording system they want to implement. The medium has some hardships in conveying the content of the spiritual communiqué, etc. But eventually a crucial addition to the knowledge about spatium states is received. And only after this session is done, that book becomes published. Let me read some parts. As the relations between spirit and body gets disconnected, the patient tries to gradually forget the whole life and things. He becomes indifferent towards these. A person who will have a brief period of confusion in the spatium, the ties to life begin to loosen before death occurs. He feels a preparation in his spirit. He knows this even if he is not sick. Sometimes he is informed about this. Spirit cannot leave the body easily, and is sorry about this, because spirit is unaware of the fact that true life begins now. As the leaving its dead body and identity, spirit talks a lot, but we cannot reflect those words to you. The medium is unable to receive the incoming vibrations. The period of death is short, as dying. Human does not yet know that he is dead. He wanders among the living ones. Of course, these wanderings happen within his imagination. He wonders why others don't see him. He calls out their names but cannot make others hear him, because he does not have senses anymore. He looks for his senses and sensations in the spatium but cannot find these. We, the habitants of the spirit realm, call this death. Patient loses his identity, his self. This is death as we understand it. Then no one make contact with him. He must spend that period by himself. At that time, he tries to assume everything he can think of as an identity. Eventually, he understands that there is a substance in him. That substance is neither a stone or a tree, neither a human. That substance is an ability of comprehension, that gathered power and comprehension that will be sufficient for him until the end of the universe. Yes, as we read that book, we learn that sometimes the deceased person sees the guiding beings and is invited by them. But from a certain point, they withdraw and leave the being completely alone in the spatium period for all those necessary processes. Of course, there are myriad examples of after-death confusion to be experienced in the spatium period, but I wanted to mention this initial period after death. Because the more we are informed about death, the more aware we are about those processes, shorter will be the confusion period when we encounter that fact which is certain for all of us. If you watched our previous videos, you remember that we had discussed about our brain and brain cells beings at many centers and stations of our whole nervous system. Through the magnetic field synthesis of these cell beings, we collect impressions from other beings and from our vicinity every day. And we are doing the same thing right now. And as we sleep every night, we send all those daily impressions to the unconscious part of our consciousness. These daily accumulations are under the control of our being, but these are not yet processed. Because of this, between this accumulation and the essence knowledge of our being, there are dissonance, disharmony. Yes, every day we accumulate all those impressions in our unconscious, and when death occurs, our being sustains its connection to the magnetic field of the brain cells beings in order to keep those gathered. And during the spatium period, our being utilizes those impressions in the magnetic field of those brain cells beings. And out of those mental and emotional image bank, certain combinations are produced. These produced combinations of imagery are mostly troubling, painful, troubling for the deceased. Yet the purpose of these imagery scenes is neither to cause suffering nor to cause ease. The purpose is this: the knowledge the being acquired in the last lifetime related to lacking points in its development and accumulated in the unconscious must be integrated or synthesized with the deep impressions and conclusions the being acquired in its past lifetimes, in other words, with its essence knowledge. Yes, about this suffering and troubling images, we read many examples in the earlier spiritual communiqués. The being's ability to suffer shows its developmental level, because this shows that that being progressed a little on the path to conscience, because the being can feel remorse and regret. I mean, there are human beings that are not at that level yet, and when they die, they are in blind unawareness and rebellion, without any sign of remorse and regret. And for human beings at the initial states of human stage, those produced imagery contains scenes of their bloodthirst, violence, etc. In the spatium time perception is warped, and the being feels those imagery continue forever. And there is a valuable knowledge from those spiritual communiques. We assume that the confusion in the spatium is like a bafflement, bewilderment, perplexity, etc. But sometimes a being cannot become detached from its last worldly identity and continue thinking itself as something. This is also confusion. And after the great internal accounting is accomplished, this complete isolation eventually ends as the being gradually wakes up and begins to receive intermittent influences from the beings in duty. And in the Spiritism session we read, the being in the spatium period may begin to say, "They tell me this or that, they show me this or that, others appear," etc. And now in the divine order and the universe, we read the mechanism of all those processes. This mechanism utilizes the imaginative activity, the mood of the beings at that moment. We must always remember that the spatium is not a place for suffering or bliss. If we cannot release some certain heaviness that we loaded on our conscience mechanism, and pass to the spatium with those weight, well, then these need to be transformed into something much subtler. As the saying goes, there is no fires in hell. Humans bring their own fire. Yes, the purpose of our world life is for making efforts in that direction, by self-study and by widening our comprehension and conscience, to die well, with as less weight on our conscience as much possible.
Thank you, dear Ümit, for choosing those informative examples from the earlier spiritual communiqués about the states of beings in the Speechify period. These earlier metapsychical studies of Mr. Ruhselman, and also such and similar studies and research done all over the world, have many examples that support the knowledge in this book. We find common points about the moment of death, like going through a narrow tunnel, reception by the deceased loved ones. Let me share one of my experiences. In a dream, I had witnessed my aunt's moment of death. In the dream, my aunt woke me up by calling my name and told me, "Tülin, I saw my husband, your grandma, and grandpa." At that moment, I understood that she would die. But she also told me, "That place is so dark, I am afraid to go there." As you can understand in her imagery, she was seeing them and wanting to go there, but her fears were preventing her. And in the dream, I took her hand and helped her to go there. When she was beside her husband, mother and father, our hands separated. At that moment, I woke up from this dream and checked the clock. 5 minutes later, telephone rang and we got the news of my aunt's death. And our dear friends may find more information and examples in the books by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Carl Nowotny, Albert Pouchard, and many more. We understand from those examples that when death is sudden, the being's unawareness about the death of its body is not uncommon. For example, death by heart attacks, traffic accidents, natural disasters, etc. In a way, the power plug is suddenly pulled out. That is why I find wisdom in this Anatolian adage. 3 days in bed, in the 4th day, grave. Because at least, the being has the chance of getting prepared towards dying. Yet, when there is no chance of such preparation, let's say, when we die in an explosion, a landslide, an earthquake, an accident, and especially, while we sleep, then it may take some time for us to become aware that we are dead now. Also, death by drug overdose or intoxication, or carbon monoxide poisoning. Because the death is not sudden and also there is mental confusion in the process, then detachment from the body and personality may take longer. And another most frequently asked question about death: suicide. Well, if a person resort to suicide for ending the hopelessness and suffering she or he cannot endure, then, in the Speechify period, all those related mental and emotional imagery are repeatedly produced, until the being overcomes this blockage or understands the cause and effect chains leading to the suicide. Therefore, suicide is not a way of escaping from the experiences we need to endure and get through. I read your questions about meeting our deceased loved ones after we die. Let me tell you that dream synced with the death of my aunt had got me thinking. Was my aunt really seeing my grandma and grandpa? Because one has died 25 years ago, another has died 27 years ago. Did her husband really come to take her to hereafter? And later, after all those studies, research and experiences, and of course, after reading the related knowledge in the divine order and the universe, it is obvious that the reception committee is not our mother, father, husband, wife, or children, but our own guiding beings. They prepare us for the following phases of death by making us aware that we are dead now. And we may consider some cases of becoming bedridden, paralyzed, and/or comatose as longer periods of getting prepared for death as well. Yes. Let me briefly say again. When we die, we take the impressions of our last lifetime, and if there are still incomplete points remaining from the life plan, then in the Speechify period, these are processed in an intense manner. I say, intense, because the defense mechanisms and justifications we had in our bodily life are not active anymore, then we face the naked truth of the consequences of what we did or did not. You know, when our cell phone screen is frozen, or when the processor of our PC cannot compute anymore. What the tech guys suggest? Turn it off and turn it on. We may think death as a reset as well. In a given lifetime, when we are got stuck to some emotions, some states, some belief patterns, or to the reality we live in. And when there is no more possibilities to change this situation, but our being needs to go to the higher reality, then a reset becomes necessary. Yes, during sleep and in dreams, we make some accounting of our impressions and states in our daily life. But the great accounting has to be done, if the term is apt, at the liquidation of the physical body, in order to determine the answers of our great questions. What did I do best? What did I miss doing? What should I complete next time? Which direction my being should go to? And so far, we read in the divine order and the universe that the purpose of this great accounting after death is to ensure our awakening more in comprehension and conscience. And as you remember, realities do not follow each other as steps of a staircase going up and up. No, in order to make choices and decisions in ever-nuancing levels, from the sensuality side, or from the intuition of duty side of our conscience mechanism, we need to live many lifetimes in either that side or that side. And we witness this fact every day. There are realities as many as the number of the humans living in the world. And until their needs are fulfilled, these seemingly clashing and conflicts among humans and within humans will continue. And death is a factor that keeps all human beings in active test and trials, in the deaths of children, in the mass deaths of people in natural disasters, in the murdered, killed people in the battles and wars. All those deaths make shocking and awakening impressions in various degrees within humans, regardless if they are dead or living, or if they are witnesses or wrongdoers. We will read in the passages about the plan of love that leaving the semi-subtle body, the beings assume in that realm will be easier. Yet, we are in the hydrogen realm, and leaving this physical body is not so easy for our being. A large part of its energy and influences has been concentrated in that body, but at the end of each lifetime, our being needs to compare the knowledge and impressions gained in the last lifetime with its essence knowledge. That is, the knowledge it gained in its past lifetimes and already processed at the end of those lifetimes, and transformed into essence knowledge to be reflected to its spirit. Would you like to add something else?
I'd like to say that we must not think the essence knowledge as the knowledge we understand in the world. Yes, with our worldly brain we make causality connections between events and we arrive at conclusions. But the state of this knowledge, when transferred to our being, is stripped of our current reality and imagery. I mean, these are not reflected to our being as they are. These are transformed into meanings, in other words, a distilled version of those impressions we acquired. Even the plan cannot find a proper term for this, but had to use deep impressions as a solution. Also in this passage we read that in the spatium the being is isolated from all influences, but if some influences are needed to come to the being from below for its accounting, this may happen only under the approval of the beings in duty.
I think, because these situations may vary from being to being, we should not generalize such information, as stated in this passage. This act is either permitted or not, in accordance with the very minute calculations pertaining to the contemplation and accounting of X during that time. When not permitted, then no power can allow its contacting mankind. And as a reply to the questions related the duration of the spatium period, let me say again that the being's time comprehension is spherical, therefore very different than our time comprehension in the world. Another question. Is the death explained in this passage the last death before we go to Plan of Duty? Well, first of all, this passage explains death in a general manner, and secondly, beings cannot pass to the Plan of Duty directly. They need to spend some preparatory period in the Plan of Duty. Yes, there may be beings going directly to the Plan of Duty, but we must understand that, in this and on the following passages, we read about the general mechanism of death. Yes, let's continue reading. After the being has gone through so many confusions, and the accounting of its acquisitions, and has digested its knowledge, the assisting influences from above start to reach it again. It also receives influences from the surroundings. Thanks to all of these, it starts to get free of the confusion and bewilderment, and recognizes itself and its surroundings, and starts to think about its future with its expanded comprehension. It appreciates the degree of its gains and losses, and starts to feel the need of returning to the world for completing his deficiencies. If this need is necessary to be fulfilled, the beings in duty who appreciate this immediately get ready to assist it by the directives coming from above, and they start out to arrange and regulate the most necessary and beneficial individual and communal plan for it. It is willingly bonded to this plan, for it appreciates that his salvation will be ensured only by the application of this plan. Therefore, it promises to be faithful to this plan in the world, and upon this promise, it embodies in the world, as we previously explained. When embodied, since it will again be under the rule of the superficial time, all riches in it that belong to the comprehension of the spherical time are erased, and all of these are cast away to the subconscious. The comprehension subjecting to superficial time begins to live in the world within new circumstances, and besides the impressions remaining from the spatium, the help of the beings in duty will support it in the world and guide it in the application of this plan. In this way, lives will follow each other, and with each coming of the man as his essence knowledge and comprehension increases, his possibilities and imperatives for shifting to the higher parts of the realities at the conscience mechanism increase as well. Since the conscience equilibrium will start to be set on the higher levels from now on, the bitter sides of the accounting in the spatium after death gradually decrease. There is a rule here. The more comprehension is expanded, the shorter the period of the isolation state in the spatium, because the faster the accounting needed to be done there is completed. Yes, our dear friends were asking about the duration of the spatium period. Here is the answer: wider the comprehension, shorter the period.
Yes, as we previously mentioned. And as you just said, not only about the processes after death, but also before death. I mean, as we live our lifetime. The more we develop our self-knowledge and our conscience in order to contribute to our essence knowledge, the shorter this isolated state will be. And as we read here, when the knowledge in the unconscious is compared with the knowledge in the subconscious, if some lacking points are detected, the being will outline a new life plan, with the help of the beings in duty. If a being's accumulation of essence knowledge reaches a stage of encompassing all knowledge world matter can provide, then the beings in duty may determine that this being does not need to incarnate in a physical body. And then, that being may begin to advance on the subtler paths of development. And this possibility is destined for all of us. That's the divine justice. All of us, plants, animals, and humans, each of us is progressing, step by step, towards that aim. Another point I'd like to make is the need of developing self-sincerity or self-honesty. Here, while in this body, we can silence our conscience or don't care about things that call for our conscientious choices. And we take our example from the majority of other people. We look at them and say, they don't care, so why should I? We can hide behind myriad excuses or just ignore the consequences of our deeds or whitewash our actions. However, in the spatium period, there is no suppression or cover over the conscience mechanism. It works openly, as it should work. Therefore, nothing can stay hidden, justified, warped, or forgotten. And because of this, the being experiences those lacking points in full volume. Shame becomes a big shame. Joy becomes a great joy. Suffering becomes agony. As you can guess, there are no mitigating circumstances in the spatium. Yes, at the last part of this passage, the key point is, as you already mentioned, widening or increasing our comprehension, and the development of comprehension advances in tandem with the development of conscience. As we widen our comprehension, the more we are able to detect and understand the causality ties or connections between events. And in doing this, the knowledge of comparison has utmost importance. We previously had read in this book, knowledge of comparison is the way of adapting comprehension to the causality principle. comprehension develops as much as it is able to adapt to the causality principle in universe. As you see, the causality of the consequences of events, all those chains of cause and effect that we experience, that we make conclusions from, are very, very important for widening our comprehension and the development of our conscience. As you may remember, we had discussed many examples when we read, "Each deed to be done should harm neither the higher nor the lower." The criterion of taking into account the consequences of our actions and choices, and we need the knowledge of comparison for ensuring this.
There was a question about this criterion. Are we included in this criterion of not harming the higher nor the lower? Well, of course, because we are the crux of a decision, of an action. And by not using the knowledge of comparison, actually the biggest harm we do to our own self, we sabotage our own development. Widening of our comprehension will wake us up from the deep slumber of illusions the worldly life brings out. And what does an awakened human being do? Because the heavy veil over the conscience is lifted, a human being acts in accordance with the conscience. In our times, as the whole family of humankind, we live the consequences of our previous actions and choices, disregarding our essential harmony with nature. Because we made egoistical and consuming choices and deeds for our convenience, for our comfort zones, for our luxuries. And interestingly, even though we now learn about the dire consequences of our past actions and deeds, we still want to continue or sustain these. And in order to do this, we silence that small but persistent voice of our conscience. We cover it, we hide it, we disregard it. Yet, in this passage of the divine order and the universe we read that there will be no disregarding of the conscience in the Spechium period. We will see and experience everything as naked facts. And of course we will not like this, because we will understand how much energy we spent, how many times we tried to disregard these. At first, we will feel remorse, guilt, regrets, but when comprehension prevails over such feelings, then, as if we will be saying, "Oh, now I see my lacking points, then I need to incarnate again to complete these issues." And this point is a sign for the beings in duty to gradually get in contact with the being in the Spechium. As the isolation lessens, the being asks the beings in duty for another opportunity for outlining another life plan for a new incarnation, and they say, "Of course, you will get that opportunity because you understood that you need this to complete your lacking points." In this passage, I'd like to underline this point. When embodied, since it will again be under the rule of the superficial time, all riches in it that belong to the comprehension of the spherical time are erased. That is, when the being builds a new body, that wider state of comprehension, including the life plan outlined with the help of the beings in duty, cannot be bring into the consciousness of the new body. Therefore, we need to experience that narrowing of comprehension once again. And here, the system is explained again. Nothing continues forever. Although suffering is only a stage to be completed, as we read here. This state is like a very deep and powerful dream. And the help and assistance of the system continues all the time. And as dear Ümit reminded us, the length of those processes in the Spechium depends on our level of comprehension. And let me remind you the importance of the power of imagination. As you see, in the Spechium, all processes occur through our mental and emotional imagery, restored in the magnetic field of the brain cells beings that the being continues its connection to, after the death of the body. Because of this, while we are alive, we must work on and with our imagination, our symbols and meanings we give to these symbols, because this is an exercise of working with subtler matter states. After all, this will be our main work in the plan of love, and we now know that what we do here is preparation for the plan of love, and what we do in the plan of love is the preparation for the plan of duty. So, it is a good idea to work with our dreams and our own dream symbols, as a part of our main work on self-knowledge. So far, what we read and discussed is to be informed about the processes we will go through when we die. If we learn this knowledge and live our life accordingly, then we can die well. What does this mean? Let me ask you, if you die now, what would you left behind as unfinished? If you die this evening, who would be the person or thing you would remain stuck or cling to? Just take a sincere look at your life and actions and thoughts that remain at the shadows. Do you have peace of mind? Or is there a list of most wanted of the offenders, wrongdoers to you? Can you take your last breath in peace without such calculations? Or do you have a long, my wants and my needs list? And which of the items in this list are your true needs? What weighs you down? Just like a hot air balloon, we need to get rid of some weight so we can soar high and above. Then first we need to know the answers to such questions to ask to ourselves. Yes, dear Ümit, we are at the end of February and at our last video with you, of course, for now. And interestingly, last year you and I had started to read and discuss the introduction to the topic of death, and we revisited the same topic again together with you.
So, you and I need to make new videos on topic of incarnation or better, of the plan of love, to follow the evolutionary path. I thank you for your invitation.
Good evening, everyone. Hoping to see you next week.